someone shows you the truth, then either you cease to be mistaken, you realize your mistake and you admit it, or you cease to be honest and you double down on your lies. In this video, I'm going to show you pretty good evidence that the Quran is man-made. It's not made by God. And I hope by the end of this video, you're actually going to think about and ponder this evidence and come to the conclusion that the Quran is man-made and that you remain honest and that you're not becoming a liar, but that you take in this information and you remain honest. So the Quran uses the Bible about 1,400 to 1,500 times. It's roughly a quarter of all of the ayah of the Quran is about biblical characters, both the Old Testament and the New Testament. The Old Testament is talked about over 1,000 times, significantly more so than the New Testament. And the Quran uses these stories in a variety of different ways. I've narrowed it down to 3 base ways that the Quran uses the biblical narrative. The first way is that it gets it correct. It's just mostly right. We see this with the Annunciation of Mary. We see it with Jesus. We see it with Zechariah and the announcement of John the Baptist. So we see that it can quote the Bible and get things pretty much correctly. But we also get these 2 other ways that the Quran is using these biblical motifs and characters. We get in the second method that is semi-accurate. It's using biblical characters, but it's not using it in ways that actually happen. It's changing it slightly. And then the last one is just straight up errors, like the Pharaoh and having Haman in his court, Saul and Gideon, the test of the armies being mixed up between them, and Mary and Miriam being mixed up. And there's like 1,400 years between these 2 women, but the Quran treats them as if they're the same person. These stories are obvious errors, and there are dozens of them, and that by itself alludes to the fact that the author of the Quran is not God, because God wouldn't make these types of mistakes. But we have so much more evidence for the human authorship of the Quran that we're going to go over in this video, that I just want to bring out these categories and what best explains each of these categories of how the Quran is using the biblical material. Well, number 3 is easy. That's just a man-made error. If the author of the Quran is just a human who doesn't have perfect knowledge of history or the Bible or its characters, if it gets those type of things wrong, that would indicate human authorship. Now, number 2 is also interesting. Number 1, where the Bible, it's just accurate, just gets everything right. That just shows that the author of the Quran either had knowledge or access to the Gospels, that had access to those narratives to be able to faithfully render them inside of its own text, inside of the Quran. contrasting. It's going to be mostly what we focus on in this video, where it takes characters from the Bible, but then it changes it and alters it. Then you get some Frankensteinian monster out on the other end. Well, it turns out whenever you examine these stories, like, Abraham smashing idols and Solomon and the Queen of Sheba and the bird and all that, speaking ants, a la Dr. Doolittle, all of those type of themes, turns out it's from the Jews, from the rabbis. So let's go through a number of these examples and show, for number 3, if the errors of the Quran is best explained by human authorship, and number 2 is best explained by stealing from the Talmud and other sources, and then number 2 also has true biblical history within it, so he could actually be quoting Christians and Jews as they quote the originals accurately, and that's how he knows about these stories. All of that kind of mixed together is going to be our argument for the human authorship of the Quran. So what do I mean by the Talmud being used for the Quran as source material? Well, there's many different stories in which the Quran is stealing from the Bible. But before that, can we quickly define what the Torah is according to the author of the Quran? Because it's my contention that the author of the Quran didn't know what the Torah actually was, and thought that the Torah was the Talmud. Why would I say that? Because in Surah 532 it says we ordained for the children of Israel. So this is a law given by Allah to the Jews, and then it quotes Sanhedrin. It quotes the Talmud. So it says, hey, this is in our scriptures that we gave to the Jews, and it's quoting something from the Talmud. It does this a lot. It says that the description of the Jews inside of the Torah is as donkey carrying books. That's again a Talmudic reference. We have lots of places where it says, hey, you'll find this, and this inside of the Torah, and whenever we look at the Torah, it's not there. We look at the Talmud, and you do find parallels that he could be alluding to. So right away, the author of the Quran seems to be mixing up the Torah and the Talmud with its references. It doesn't seem to fully know the distinguishing difference between actual Torah and the oral Torah the Jews were practicing, preaching, and believing in at the time of Muhammad. So, let's go through some examples of what's actually stolen, what's alluded to, and all of that thing. There's a lot of stories that are just straight rip-offs of the rabbinic versions. Surah 12, for example, with the Joseph narrative, is extremely Jewish and Christian from the man-made myths that were being developed in the 200s, 300s, 400s, and 500s even. So stories that are circulating around Arabia and are popular at the time that actually disagree with the biblical narrative but are being given for theological purposes purposes. The Quran adopts some of those stories and motifs, even though they're not from God. For example, Jacob sending the brothers through different gates because they are beautiful and handsome, and he feared the evil eye for them. Now, the plain reading of the Talmud and the Quran is very explicit, and it's surface level for sure. But it's not just the surface level explanation for many of these, it's also the scholarly, the tafsir explanation of these stories use the rabbinic understanding, because people like Ibn Abbas and Ibn Huraira, they are not stealing, they're being taught and trained by ex-Jews and ex-Christians who converted to the faith, and a lot of that got carried over into the understanding of Islam that we find in the Hadith and the Tafsir through Israeliyat, the stories of the Jews. They were accepted largely because of dudes that had very big influence within early Islamic thought, such as Abdullah ibn Salam, Kaib al-Ahbar, and Wahb ibn Murabiyah. These people were heavily knowledgeable about those old stories, and may have even brought a physical Talmud, because there's times where Ibn Kathir literally quotes it. What we see in some of these places is not just the Quran stealing from it, the tafsir too. So the Islamic understanding of these type of passages with the evil eye, or even with Jacob appearing in a window and telling Joseph not to have intercourse with Potiphar's wife, or he appears in the window and he says, "Son, don't do this. Don't you want to be remembered in the grave?" And then, Joseph, in response to this, because he really wanted to sleep with Potiphar's wife, he dug his fingers into the ground and injected semen into the earth. Crazy. So man gooned through his fingertips. That story is found within the tafsir on this section. So the tafsir is using the Talmudic story. And this story is wild. It has no sense. It has no reason to be there. But these scholars are using this to explain away the Quran. And we see this all over the place in so many different stories. So it's not just the Quran surface level borrowing from the Jews, but the tafsirs, the scholars of the Hadiths, are borrowing from the Jews as well. This problem is so pervasive because all of your religion is founded on rabbinic Judaism, not Judaism that goes back to Sinai. Judaism that goes back to 200 AD, after the time of Jesus. And between Jesus and Muhammad, there were no prophets. So this is fresh, new things, new commentary, new beliefs, new myths that are not from Sinai, that are being found inside of the Quran and the Hadith and the Tafsir. Why? If your religion is from Allah, why is it so much from humans and specifically from the Jews. But let's go through many examples just so you can get a sense of how deep this problem truly is. For example, the prophets being sinless, the Isma doctrine, that is stolen from the Jews. Abraham smashing idols, stolen from the Jews. Abraham conversion by looking at stars, stolen from the Jews. Abraham meeting the three visitors, stolen from the Jews. Abraham building the Kaaba, possibly stolen from the Jews. I made a video on it. Solomon speaking to birds and using birds to pick up chicks and to kill people. That is stolen from the Jews and also very funny. It's in Surah 27. Adam being a giant and shrinking over time, as well as the prostration of the angels not being able to name them, the Garden of Eden being in heaven and then being segmented to earth, all of that Jewish, as is the story of the mountain being picked up in Surah 263. We see that Mount Sinai was picked up and held over the Jews. This never happened. Not only do we have no archaeological evidence or whatsoever, this is also from the Talmud explicitly, and many other prophets that I haven't mentioned. But it's not just that your stories are stolen, your theology is stolen too. Not only is all of your theological language stolen from Aramaic and Hebrew and Syriac from the Jews and Christians, but also your beliefs about Jannah and Gehenna, specifically your beliefs in the four rivers of paradise, everyone being given a portion of Jannah and Gehenna, and that there's only a thin wall dividing them, which comes in the Hadith. This is how Talmud, even your idea of Judgment Day, all of it. So the angels on your shoulders writing your books of right and wrong deeds themselves being weighed on the scales of Allah, and Allah making your scales easier, He's tipping them in the favor of those who He shows kindness to. All of your Judgment Day is extremely Jewish and Talmudic. The idea of the resurrection means such a big deal, and those who deny the resurrection going to hell, that is Talmudic. The idea that dreams are prophecy, that God can speak to you through them. The idea that sleep is a form of death, and God has to return your soul to you when you wake up. All of these things are extremely Jewish. Pretty much all of your demonology and all of your beliefs on jinn and witchcraft and all of that is stolen from the Jews and from mostly the Talmud. The fact that there was a book, Kitab, given to all people groups by a prophet among their community, that's just straight up from the Talmud, including the beliefs of Qadar and predestination, that everything is predetermined by the book and what was written in it. That is again from the Jews. And same with the divine council and jinn trying to hear about the divine council's assemblies, behind the curtain, Allah having two right hands, seven heavens, God only liking even numbers, not liking odd, or He only likes odd numbers. He doesn't like even numbers. So you have to wipe with a certain number of stones that are odd numbered. That's again from the Jews, from Jewish superstition, from Babylon specifically, including God holding up the sky so it doesn't fall apart, fall down a la Chicken Little. That's Jewish. God turning people into pigs and apes for breaking the Sabbath. That's Jewish, ironically. And also the categories of even shirk and kafar. Those categories themselves are Jewish. But it's not just your stories and your theology that is stolen, it's also your practices. The 5 pillars are extremely Jewish. Jews have the 3 daily prayers that you find inside the Quran. They pray with the Qibla towards Jerusalem as Muhammad did for a decade. Pilgrimage, Hajj, that is all from the Jews. Your pillars of your faith are rabbinic, not from Sinai, not from a prophet, but from Jews who invented it in the 200s, 300s, and 400s. Only having 4 wives, and the reason why you have 4 wives is for equity between them, for both financial and sexual fairness between the women. That is all Jewish from the Talmud. Use the same logic on why you can only have 4 wives. It's crazy. Your beliefs on how you treat your women, other than, beating them, that comes from the Jews. It's wild. And it's not just all of that, but it's even the names of Allah are stolen from things like Bereshit Rabbah, that the names like Ar-Rahman, the merciful one, the bestower of mercy. That is a Jewish phrase from Yemen that he picked up. And mind you, these names are not biblical names. These are not names that appeared from prophets. These are names that are only appearing by the Jewish rabbis hundreds of years after prophecy had ended, according to Islam. Why is it in the Quran? Why is it in your system? And it's not just all those things. There's an additional 53 things I didn't even mention in this video. There's so many things that are stolen. The vast majority of the Quranic material is stolen from Jews, Christians, Zoroastrians, Greeks, Romans, and pagans. Your entire religious system is stolen from people before him. This is why Muhammad was known as the ear, because you have things like the sleepers of the cave of Ephesus being stolen from the Christians, the infancy narratives of Jesus being stolen from the Gnostics. You have quarries being stolen from the Zoroastrians. You have the age of nursing possibly from the Greeks, could also be from the Talmud. And you also have the semen's theory, the 2 semens theory, coming from the Greeks. And then you also have the satanic verses coming from the pagans, among some of the other practices, including what happens at the Kaaba. So we have all these systems being in place, and the ear just copied from all of them and made one large sections of the world now. So the things that are the most original to your religion are things like killing dogs and Muhammad being gay and having with children, murdering his critics, and the satanic verses. These are the things that are original to Islam that shows that he is a false prophet. These are not things that are from God. God would not command you to murder all dogs, or to just murder the black dogs, or to children. He would not command that, yet Muhammad did. Not only did he do it, he encouraged it. Now, one of the rebuttals that I get the most by Muslims is the Talmud is actually just quoting the Quran. It's not that the Talmud and Midrash is the source material for the Quran. It's actually that the Quran is the source material for the Talmud and the Midrash, and the Jews are actually stealing from Muhammad, not Muhammad stealing from the Jews. That doesn't work for a wide variety of reasons. The main reason is the language use itself. So the way that scholars date materials is not based on the manuscript dating itself. Manuscripts really don't matter that much. We have a bunch of examples of history where we have a manuscript that is, 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 years after it was written, because that's our oldest surviving copy of it. And yeah, we still firmly place that the original was written 1,000+ years before. So even if the earliest complete Talmud is from the 1100s, that doesn't mean that it wasn't written 600 years before that. We have fragments from 100 to 200 years after the Talmud was written, but we have complete codexes and complete commentaries on those codexes in earlier time period. We have commentaries from the 800s and 900s. So people knew about it, people were talking about it, and we have different sources to show when the book was written. One of the easiest ways to tell that the Talmud was before the Quran is the influence of foreign languages or loan words within both texts. So the Quran has hundreds, if not thousands, of loan words from Persian, from Aramaic, from Syriac, which are kind of the same thing, and also from Hebrew. There's a lot of Hebrew words inside of the Quran. These words are borrowed from the rabbinic sources. So we can see, like, oh yeah, the Quran is being influenced by the Talmud because it's Arabirized, even though it says it's pure Arabic. It's Arabirized loan words that are being placed inside of it. One such important loan word is Shekinah. In the Quran, it's called sakana. That word is the dwelling or the glory of God on earth. It happens 6 times in the Quran, 3 of which are happening in Surah 48. And Surah 48:26 is very important. Then Allah sent down his Shekinah upon his messenger and upon the believers and made them stick to the word of piety. And they were well entitled to it, and they were worthy of it. It's from the Halali Khan. That theology of they were entitled So this is a Talmudic allusion, but this word itself, Shekinah, is a word rabbis invented. That's a combination of two other words. They slam it together in order to create this new meaning. This word itself does not appear in the Bible. This word does not appear, the roots of it appear in the Bible, but Shekinah itself does not appear in the Bible. So this is a rabbinic term that was first used in the Mishnah hundreds of years after that, and even after, my opinion, it's after the time of Jesus that it was first being used, because we don't even see it in the New Testament. So the Shekinah that appears in the Quran is a fabricated word by rabbis, and the Quran uses its theological meaning that the rabbis are using. This is a word that should not exist in the Quran because it's not Arabic, and the Quran says it's pure Arabic. And it is a loan word from humans. Why is God using this word when this is a word invented by humans? That's not even accurate, because Muslims believe Allah can't enter into reality. This is what that word is describing. It's Allah entering into reality. This word, and then the surrounding quotations of the Talmud in it, just shows that the Quran is false. But there's many such words that are stolen from the Jews. So your vocabulary is stolen from the Jews. But interestingly, the Talmud, remember, this is testing which one came first. Did the Talmud come first, or did the Quran come first? The Quran has hundreds, if not thousands, of loan words from Jews and Christians.